that laid the foundation for the creation of many of these clans. By now, some of the most powerful clans even had several. But getting an aspect legacy was not an easy feat. Most of them were received by saints, followed by master, and only a few were won by mere awakened. Getting the aspect legacy while still being a sleeper, that was simply unheard of. Just like getting a true name during the first nightmare, I guess. Sunny couldn't believe his luck. Of course, he worked bitterly hard to be able to grasp it. And yet, the magnitude of the harvest he reaped was utterly unbelievable. However, why was his aspect legacy not a memory, but a battle art? That was really strange. Not wasting any time, Sunny summoned the runes and hungrily searched for new ones. What he saw made him tremble. Previous index next. Copyright symbol 2023 Light. Shadow Slave Chapter 219, Relics of the Past. Right there in the glimmering field of familiar runes, in the cluster describing his aspect, a new string of them appeared. Aspect, Shadow Slave. Aspect rank, Divine. Aspect abilities, Shadow Control. Aspect legacy, Shadow Dance. As soon as Sunny concentrated on the aspect legacy, new runes shined to describe it. Shadow Dance description, once an elegant dance, now a deadly battle art. This mysterious style was created by the treacherous Lost from Light, after witnessing a graceful slave dancing with her shadows. Who else could have taken something so beautiful and turned it into something so vile? Sunny coughed, trying hard not to think too much about the manner in which the spell had described him. Again with this treacherous stuff. I'm not that treacherous, okay? So what if I lie, manipulate, and backstab people all the time? That's just being smart. However, what grabbed his attention was not the description itself, but what glimmered beneath it. Shadow Dance Mastery Level 0 to 7. First Relic, unearned. Second Relic, unearned. Third Relic. There were a total of 7 lines of runes, each promising him a legacy relic once he achieved the corresponding level of mastery with his newly envisioned battle style. 7 of them. Not 1, not even 2 or 3. But 7. Whole legacy clans were created around a single legacy relic. Sunny couldn't even imagine what he would be able to do with 7. Start a family and turn it into the most powerful clan in the world. No, that would mean putting all his eggs into one basket. Better create several clans. Right? Why start a family when you can start 7? Wait, no, that didn't sound right. Right? Consumed by avarice, Sunny looked at the rising sun with an excited grin. This was great. This was incredible. However, his excitement was short-lived. Yeah, right. I would have to get back to the real world first. And that's not going to happen. Turning his head slightly, he stared at the distant silhouette of the crimson spire and lost himself in thought. A while later, Effie's voice brought him back to reality. Hey, doofus. Breakfast is ready. Why are spacing out and smiling like an idiot? Sunny answered without thinking. Just thinking about creating a legacy clan. Have you ever thought about creating a clan, huh, Effie? The robust huntress stared at him for a few seconds with a strange expression and then grinned. Is that an invitation? Still lost in thought, Sunny tilted his head and glanced at her astutely. Not bad, not bad. The choice of a partner has to be of utmost importance when starting a legacy clan. Take Effie, for example. She is a very fearsome awakened. Her aspect is extravagant and powerful beyond belief. Plus, her physique is nothing short of divine. Any heir she gives birth to is bound to be both strong and gorgeous. A very suitable candidate, I guess. What? No, not an invitation. Just considering different options. At that moment, Sunny suddenly realized that he had been unceremoniously ogling Effie up and down for a better half of a minute, and that her grin had long turned dangerous at some point. The huntress stretched her neck and said lazily, I see. So you have chosen death. He blinked. No. Wait. I didn't mean it like that. I was just, theorizing. The unruly huntress cracked her knuckles and smiled menacingly. Oh, so you were theorizing about me, huh? Do tell, do tell. No. Wait. Stop. Stew. ******. Surprisingly, Sunny survived. Barely. Soon after that, they left the grandiose marble arch and continued their journey into the depths of the labyrinth. Before the expedition started, Nephis had told him that they had a fast and comparatively safe way to reach the southern edges of the Forgotten Shore, as much as anything could be safe in this cursed place. Without it, getting to their destination would have taken them months. Now that they had left the Dark City, Sunny finally decided to satisfy his curiosity and asked what that mysterious method of traveling with incredible speed was. When he heard the answer, he just stared blankly at Changing Star for a few minutes, trying to guess if she was kidding or not. She wasn't. In the end, he didn't even ask any questions and just waved his hand dejectedly. There was no point. If Nephis had come to know of the secret from Cass's visions and believed that it was doable, then he did not have to worry too much. It's not like he could turn back now, anyway. Plus, the expedition had shown itself to be extremely lucrative for him so far. Mere days after its start, he had already gotten plenty of shadow fragments and an ascended memory, not to mention making a breakthrough in his exploration of battle styles and earning an aspect legacy for his effort. In any case, they had to travel about a week's worth of time south to get the chance to access that fast method of travel. The heights they were going to use on the way as shelters during the nights they were planned in advance with the help of the forgotten shore map Nephis had created. To make sure that these shelters were really where the map showed and remove any possibility of ending up stranded in the middle of the labyrinth with no way to escape the dark sea, she had even employed Kai during the week that Sunny had spent with Effie. The charming archer scouted the way ahead and confirmed that her map was correct. Now, the only danger they really faced from the forgotten shore itself was that of a sudden storm. However, with a true oracle in the ranks of the cohort, this danger was dramatically diminished. Now that Cassie had grown into her powers and absorbed a lot of soul essence, she was often able to warn them in advance if something like that was going to happen. There were also the usual perils of the labyrinth, of course. And as they went deeper into its deadly maze, the situation slowly began to turn from bad to worse. Previous index next. Shadow Slave Chapter 220. So you're a spider, so what? As they ventured deeper into the southern reaches of the Crimson Labyrinth, the situation slowly turned worse and worse. The iron spiders that had been not too threatening to the cohort of powerful, experienced Dark City hunters at the start of it all were growing more and more deadly with each step of the way. Their numbers grew exponentially, becoming a real danger pretty soon. More and more often bigger and stronger monsters appeared at the head of the attacking beasts, bringing with them all sorts of problems. What's worse, the spiderweb they used to trap their prey was changing, too. The metal wires from which it was weaved became so thin that it was at times almost impossible to notice it, and sharp enough to cut through armor and bone, while maintaining the resilience of superb steel. The whole labyrinth was covered in it, turning from crimson to dull grey. The cohort bled much more because of the invisible webs than they did because of the spiders themselves. Of course, the iron spiders were cunning creatures, too. More often than not, they only attacked once one of the humans was caught in their nets, leading to a few really harrowing experiences for the members of Changing Stars Party. And there was a wide variety of other terrifying creatures waiting to ambush them in the twisting pathways of the Crimson Coral, too. What made them so dangerous was that the cohort didn't know anything about their anatomy and abilities. Every fight was a gamble, often resulting in one or several of them sustaining serious wounds. There were three things that made the situation somewhat bearable. The first one was Nephis and her healing flame. Although using the aspect ability took a toll on their leader, it was often worth it, especially if one of the members of the cohort received wounds that limited their mobility. One thing was far more dangerous than any nightmare creature that lived in the labyrinth, and it was not reaching safety before the torrent of black water flooded the forgotten shore, bringing inconceivable horrors with it. Thanks to Ned, they didn't have to worry about anyone slowing the cohort down. The second reason, unexpectedly, was the iron spiders themselves. Because of the peculiar way they hunted, a lot of creatures found their deaths in the cutting embrace of the wire spider webs. Finding these eviscerated corpses, or cocoons containing old carcasses, became a common occurrence once the party invaded the depths of the spider territory. Thanks to that, 6 humans were able to study and anticipate many of the monsters they had to face in this region of the labyrinth. A lot of potentially deadly surprises had been avoided due to the cohort stumbling onto a corpse of a similar creature prior to fighting against a living one, and spending some time to learn about its strengths and weaknesses. The third reason was the blood arrow. In the hands of an experienced archer, it was almost as deadly as it would have been in the hands of an inexperienced one, the difference being that the latter would mostly be a danger to themselves, quickly turning into a bloodless husk. The first time Kai had used it, Sunny experienced a disturbing feeling of shock. That time, they were facing a large group of iron spiders led by a much larger arachnid, the awakened monster of their tribe, similar in status to a carapace centurion. These creatures were much heavier and more powerful, with thick plates of iron armor covering their bodies almost completely. Even Caster's enchanted sword had trouble cutting through their defenses. What's worse, due to the speed with which the wretched abominations moved, it was especially hard to catch them in a gap between the armor plates. Sunny was facing two smaller iron spiders at once while the stone saint was whittling the third one. With his shadow observing what was happening behind his back, he didn't miss the moment when the cunning awakened monster suddenly disengaged from Nephis and dashed into his direction, its mandibles moving in anticipation of tasting human flesh. Calmly preparing to dodge, Sunny tensed his muscles and narrowed his eyes. Whistling over his shoulder, a menacing black arrow suddenly streaked through the air. Its shaft was made out of dark polished wood, with black feathers reflecting on a vicious white arrowhead that seemed to be cut from pale white bone, like a sharp fang of some terrible creature. The arrow easily pierced the thick iron plate protecting the spider, and tore deep into his body. Even though Kai messed up his shot a bit and hit the monster in its abdomen instead of the head, the results were nothing short of harrowing. In the next moment, the awakened monster suddenly slowed down and staggered. Then, it tried to lunge forward once again, but ended up losing its balance and weakly falling to the ground. Its limbs moved slightly, quickly losing any form of cohesion. Their movements grew slower and then stopped. Beneath the iron plates, the spider's body grew taut and shriveled, like that of a mummy. Soon, it seemed completely drained. Sunny blinked, shaken by this disturbing image, and couldn't help but glance briefly at his forearm. If not for the blood weave, he might have ended up as a shriveled corpse, too. He would have gone through with cutting off his arm and survived, most likely. But if he had been a couple of seconds too late, better not to think about. Anyway, he was glad that the blood arrow was on their side now. Not too far away from him, gliding through the air, Kai suddenly made a strange gasping sound. Sunny didn't know what it felt like to have your blood magically drained and then suddenly returned to your body, but he doubted that it was pleasant. Also, there was this question: if Kai's blood was used to create the arrow and then returned to him, if he had hit his mark, of course, then, where did the blood drain from the prey went? He wasn't sure that he wanted to know. In any case, with Nightingale in possession of the morbid ascended memory, their battles with iron spiders and other inhabitants of the labyrinth became a bit less perilous. The blood arrow did not have any enchantments that needed to be activated by manipulating soul essence, so the charming archer could use it to its full potential. Although Sunny was still a bit bitter about having to give such a menacing weapon away, he was now more confident than ever that his decision was the right one. Just like that, 6 more days passed by. During this time, he didn't gain any new memories, but managed to accumulate 18 more shadow fragments, bringing his total to 340. He was still not as strong physically as he had been before creating the Shadow Saint, but getting closer and closer. In the evening of the 6th day, blooded and exhausted, the cohort had finally approached the goal of the first leg of their expedition. Looking at it, Sunny couldn't help but stop in his tracks. His eyes slightly widened. Of course. Previous index next. Shadow Slave Chapter 221, Zenith. In front of them, the ground was shattered, creating a titanic fracture. The canyon was so deep and vast that Sunny had to strain his eyes. He realized that there must have been an ancient road somewhere beneath their feet. It led directly to the main gates of the ancient city, moving across the colossal canyon by means of the miraculous bridge, and passing beneath the grandiose arch of white marble. Come to think of it, the headless knight, the ashen barrow, and the graceful woman whose hands had saved him twice were also situated in a straight line. Perhaps there was another road leading east, too. However, this thought disappeared from his head as quickly as it had appeared. All his attention was drawn to the remnants of the stone bridge, where stood another giant statue. Right above the weathered ruins stood a colossal stone warrior. He was clad in an archaic cuirass, with a beautiful spear resting on his shoulder. The warrior was facing south, as though greeting the travelers who traveled on the road to reach the ancient city. Of course, his head was missing. More than that, the whole statue was covered in vast sheets of dull grey spiderweb, as if dressed in a solemn burial shroud. Sunny shivered, afraid to imagine what kind of creature was capable of creating the thick metal cables of the web that encompassed the stone colossus. Noticing his expression, Effie smiled. Scary, huh? Sunny gave her a nod, hoping against all hope that they would not have to find out the answer to his question. For once, his hopes were not shattered to pieces. The vivacious huntress sighed. I haven't seen it myself, but I heard stories of the creature that used to make its nest here. It was the mother of all these damnable spiders we've been dealing with for the past week. A huge menace of a nightmare creature, as big as a house and utterly deadly. Armored like a hover tank, too. Sunny gulped and cast a sideways look at Nephis. What's a hover tank? Effie blinked a couple of times, then answered in an amused tone. Oh, right. You're a school dropout, I almost forgot. You've seen a PTV before, right? PTV stands for a personal transport vehicle, as you know. I hope. Well, a tank is sort of like that, only much bigger and heavier, with thick armor and a kinetic or energy cannon installed on it. The government sometimes employs them to support awakenings when a gate opens near populated areas. Sunny tried to imagine such a vehicle, and hazily remembered seeing something like this on the news when he was a kid. Mostly, these tanks Effie had described were shown opened like tin cans, with their crews pulled out and eaten by attacking monsters. He shivered. Mundane people had no business fighting against nightmare creatures. To be completely honest, even awakened will have no business facing them. It's just that they have no other choice. We're not going to try and kill that big spider, are we? Effie laughed. Actually, it's your lucky day. We won't be meeting the spider mommy. In fact, no one ever will. She's long dead. Sunny sighed with relief and glanced at the huntress. Yeah, great. But how do you know? She shrugged. She was killed by the second ruler of the Bright Castle, before he went and got himself killed trying to conquer the Crimson Spine. The huntress who showed me the ropes, when I arrived on the Forgotten Shore, had actually been one of the members of his cohort once, if you can believe it. In fact, she was the one who dealt the finishing blow to that abomination. Effie looked at the giant mass of spider webs and shook her head. It must have been one hell of a battle, huh? Anyway, I'm glad that she did. That's how she received the Zenith Shard, which I then inherited. Sunny frowned. What exactly are you talking about? The huntress leaned on her beautiful bronze spear and patted its shaft. My spear. It's a Tier 5 awakened memory, so the big bad spider was an awakened tyrant, I guess. Can you imagine? All these creepy crawlers serving a sentient commander. Thank gods it's dead. Sunny looked at her with a dubious expression. Why would that mentor of your give away such a treasure? Effie was silent for a few moments, then smiled. Ah, we were kind of close. Plus, she had no idea how to use a spear. Sorcerers, am I right? In any case, she gave the Zenith shard to me. Despite her carefree tone, he could tell that that smile was fake. Effie did not let it show, but Sunny could tell that the death of this huntress, whose name he didn't even know, had affected her more than she was telling. Who knows? Since Effie's original cohort had perished in the catacombs, their corpses might still be somewhere there, in those cursed tunnels. However, something else was on his mind. Sunny furrowed his brow. Midnight Shard, Zenith Shard. Was there a connection? He didn't know. There might have been. He had received the Midnight Shard from Nephis, who had gotten it after killing the Carapace demon. The demon, even though it had been enthralled by the Soul Devourer, appeared as the leader of the nightmare creature in that region of the labyrinth, just like the broodmother of the iron spiders had been. Two headless statues, two powerful abominations, two memories with similar names. Wasn't it a little bit too much to be a coincidence? Glancing at Effie, he asked, was your spear forged from a shard of a fallen star, by chance? Just as he said it, Cassie slightly turned her head, listening to their conversation. That small detail told Sunny everything he wanted to know. The huntress raised her eyebrows. It was, at least according to its description. Who told you? A corner of Sunny's lips slightly curled upward. No one. I just guessed. With that, he left Effie alone and walked forward. It seemed as though he was right. There was some hidden meaning behind the names of these two memories. Cassie seemed to know something about it, and that meant that Nephis did, too. And yet, they chose to keep it from Sunny and the rest of the cohort. He sighed. So this expedition is not as simple as it seems. Not that it ever seemed particularly simple, to begin with. He had guessed a long time ago that Changing Star had some hidden motive to want to leave the Dark City, but now, his suspicions were as good as confirmed. The smile disappeared from Sunny's face. He didn't like being kept in the dark at all. Kept in the dark, huh? Oh, the irony. At that moment, his shadow reached the base of the giant statue. With a deep frown, Sunny summoned the Midnight Shard and glanced at Nephis, putting all needless thought aside. There's a nest ahead. We will have to destroy it to access the statue. Lots of spiders, some bigger ones, too. She gave him a nod and turned to face the others. Clad in heavy plates of iron armor shot from beneath the grey spiderweb, moving through the steel wires with terrifying speed. There were enough nightmare creatures in that wave to obliterate anything that stood in their way, seemingly. However, what stood in their way were two figures, one tall and boisterous, the other one on the shorter side and radiating a strange feeling of indifferent firmness. They were Effie and the Stone Saint. Both held their shields raised, the tips of their weapons resting on their edges. As the huntress grinned, the shadow silently struck the rim of her shield with the blade of her sword twice. As if answering that call, a vicious black arrow suddenly appeared from somewhere above, hitting the leading spider right in one of its many eyes. The monster's legs buckled, and it fell to the ground, forcing those creatures that followed behind to either dash around or jump over the massive body. A fraction of a second later, the wave of spiders crashed into the small shield wall. A deafening roar of iron striking against iron resounded under the grey skies of the Forgotten Shore like a thunderclap. Despite the furious force of the assault, Effie and the Stone Saint somehow held, at least for now. As soon as the momentum of the Iron Spiders was slowed down a little, Nephis and Castor appeared out of nowhere and attacked the massive repulsive creatures from the sides. At the same time, a stone-like sword and a beautiful bronze spear lashed out from behind the shields. Black blood splashed into the air. Meanwhile, Sunny softly landed on the ground behind the nightmare creatures, and stealthily moved through the shadows, swiftly approaching them from the back. The midnight shard flashed, sending one of the spiders into the embrace of death. You have slain an awakened beast. Without listening to the spell, Sunny used the precious moments before the enemy noticed his presence to wreak as much havoc as possible. His Tachi moved twice more, severing several limbs and heavily wounding another abomination. After that, the spiders finally reacted to his treacherous attack. Not treacherous, just smart. With Effie and the Stone Saint holding the front, Nephis and Castor attacking from the sides, and Sunny closing the trap from behind, the monstrous arachnids were now surrounded from all sides. Well, sort of. Of course, a small group of dormant humans could never hope to truly surround this many superior nightmare creatures, not even with the help of a monster of their own. Trapped or not, as soon as the Iron Spiders had the time to react, they could easily overwhelm and tear them to pieces. Especially Sunny, who was behind the line these vicious creatures and all alone. If the spiders decided to shift the focus of their attack, he would be dead in seconds. As another black arrow hit one of the larger spiders in the abdomen, Sunny hissed and dove under a spider scythe, then thrust his sword forward, ruthlessly piercing the head of the beast through its open, salivating mouth. You have. With no time to tear the midnight shard from the spider's core, Sunny let go of its hilt and jumped back, narrowly avoiding being crushed by another ironclad creature. The few seconds of the advantage they had were coming to an end. A moment or two later, the spiders were bound to come to their senses. Even though the cohort had managed to kill 10 or so in this short window of time, there was still enough of the deadly creatures to rip them to shreds. Sunny didn't even have to look at Nephis to feel the shift in her movements. The silent understanding the two of them developed during their journey through the labyrinth many months ago was still there, allowing them to cooperate perfectly without the need to use any words, as though they were two parts of the same whole. In fact, despite the rift in their relationship, this bond was stronger than ever. Perhaps because they understood each other so much better now, for better or for worse. It was so exhilarating to fight side by side with Changing Star once again. Just before the spiders were able to turn the tide of the battle in their favor, Effie and the Stone Saint, who was following Sunny's command, suddenly moved to the sides. Nephis, Castor, and Sunny braced themselves. Behind the improvised shield wall stood Cassie. She was holding a wooden staff in her hand, while an elegant rapier hovered in the air above her shoulder. The tip of the rapier pointed directly at the spiders. As though following the direction of the quiet dancer's blade, Cassie moved her staff and activated its enchantment. Immediately, a powerful gust of hurricane wind slammed into the mass of the nightmare creatures, sending several of them reeling and throwing clouds of dust into the air. Of course, it wasn't strong enough to truly throw these abominations off their balance, or damage them in any way. However, that wasn't the plan. Spider King of these creatures back on Earth had a uniquely powerful sense of hearing, which was rather strange, considering that they had no organs that resembled ears at all. The truth of the matter was that spiders were able to feel the vibrations of sound waves. They were also masterful architects, using the vibrations in the specially created threads weaved into their webs to sense the movements of their prey from afar. These nightmare creatures were much the same. As the powerful wind threw dust into the air and made every wire of every surrounding spiderweb vibrate all at once, they were momentarily disoriented. The members of the cohort were waiting for this exact moment. Instantly, they attacked with ferocious determination, spilling rivers of viscous black blood onto the ground. Sunny himself had already gotten his austere sword back, and now used its razor-sharp blade to gut the beast that had forced him to retreat a couple of seconds ago. "You have slain." By the time the iron spiders came back to their senses, their numbers were significantly diminished. But there were still so many of them. After that, the battlefield became consumed with chaos. There was no time for plans or tactics anymore. Every member of the cohort had to face off against multiple opponents, fighting with desperate resolve against enemies that surpassed them both in terms of personal power and numbers. Only the Stone Saint was calm and indifferent, moving through the ranks of the iron spiders like a graceful incarnation of pure darkness. The battle fell apart into several small pockets of fearsome violence. Kai was trying to support his companions from above, but with how intense the fighting got, he was having trouble finding the opportunities to take shots without risking hitting them. He was too afraid to take a risk, knowing all too well how harrowing the effects of the blood arrow were. If even the nightmare creatures of higher rank were doomed to succumb to a torturous death after being wounded by the ghastly memories, humans like them had no chance of surviving. For now, people on the ground were on their own. Sunny was struggling against two ironclad abominations, gritting his teeth in exasperation. The damn bastards were too fast to reliably hit them in the gaps in armor, and too damn powerful to face them directly. As the result, he was forced to constantly dance between the two of them, dodging the whirlwind of strikes that rained on him from all sides. Curses! Jumping back, he held the midnight shard with one hand and used another to throw the prowling thorn in the direction of one of the spiders. The creature easily dodged the kunai and continued its attack, threatening to slice Sunny's hand clean off. He had no choice but to retreat once again. Behind the menacing beast, the throwing dagger continued to spin. A few moments later, it cut a smooth arch in the air and flew back, as if turning into a boomerang. Sadly, just like the spiders back on Earth, these repulsive creatures had an almost absolute field of vision. The second spider simply moved its head down at the last moment, without even bothering to turn it, dodging the heavy kunai that in their webs. The iron spiders were now caught by the invisible string of the prowling thorn, tripping over it and crashing into each other. Sunny dashed forward and let the midnight shard sing. The graceful blade flashed twice, sending two ugly spider heads spinning into the air. "You have slain an awakened beast, Iron Spider. Your shadow grows stronger." Kicking one of the heads away, Sunny swiftly glanced around, searching for a new enemy. But there were none. "You have slain an awakened beast, Iron Spider. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received a memory." The gargantuan cocoon of steel spider webs was empty. Corpses of its previous inhabitants littered the ground, oozing with black blood. The cohort had cleared the entire nest full of awakened abominations. No matter how incredible, this was the undeniable truth. They had won. Previous index next. Copyright symbol 20. Shadow Slave Chapter 223, Natural Selection. The danger was gone, so Sunny allowed himself to tiredly kneel on the ground, his breathing heavy and laborious. The strenuous battle against the host of spiders had not lasted long, but he was utterly exhausted. The intensity of these perilous minutes was enough to bring anyone down to their knees. Too weak. I am still too weak. With a heavy sigh, he summoned the runes and glanced at the number of shadow fragments. Shadow fragments, 362 of 1000. Not bad. Clearing the nest had given him 22 fragments, 10 for the 5 iron spiders he had killed himself, and another 12 for those slain by the Shadow Saint. With the taciturn monster serving as his murderous pet, the speed with which Sunny was able to accumulate power was twice as fast, at least. If things continued like this, the Stone Saint was going to return his investment of 100 shadow fragments in no time. If I live long enough. With a grimace, Sunny dismissed the midnight shard and slowly got up. The sun was already rolling down toward the horizon, so they had to hurry with collecting soul shards from the corpses of the iron spiders. There were a lot of corpses. Cutting one of the beasts open with the prowling thorn, Sunny struggled with the idea that they had eviscerated this many nightmare creatures. Of course, he had expected this much. After all, Nephis and Sunny had been able to fight against 2 or 3 carapace scavengers back, when it was only the 2 of them. Both of them were much weaker, less experienced, and barely equipped with memories back then, too. Now that they had spent 7 whole months in the Dream Realm, many times more than most sleepers ever had to, and tempered themselves against the perilous hellscape of the Forgotten Shore, both their skill and level of power had dramatically increased. Add the fact that there were 2 other powerhouses fighting alongside them, as well as Nightingale and the menacing Stone Saint, and the outcome of the battle ceased to be that surprising. And yet, observing the carnage that they had left if their wake still made Sunny doubt his eyes. These were awakened nightmare creatures, still. The real reason why the cohort had won did not lie in the individual prowess of its members, but in their ability to cooperate and control the battlefield. The iron spiders were powerful and deadly, but at the end of the day, they were still mindless with the carapace demon and the spider matriarch, who had been either a devil or a tyrant. Perhaps it was just the nature of this place. Nothing too big and strong could escape from the flood of black water that drowned the world every night. Only comparatively small monsters were able to run away or hide, both from the dark sea itself and from the hungry terrors that inhabited it. These monsters were an almost insurmountable threat to those unfortunate young people who were sent to this forsaken hell by the spell, but by the standards of the Forgotten Shore itself, they were nothing but insects. A horde of parasites who fed on the crumbs left behind by the true masters of this place. What a depressing thought. This nation poured cold water on Sunny's pride over their achievement. Well, whatever. Soon, they were done with the gruesome job of fishing out the soul shards out of the dead spiders. While Nephis was dividing the spoils among the members of the cohort, Sunny used the chance to dive into his soul sea and inspect the memory he had received during the battle. It turned out to be a cloak weaved from spider silk. Judging from the description, the cloak could provide him with a small amount of protection against physical attacks, simple by virtue of being very hard to piece. Without thinking too much, Sunny fed the cloak to the Stone Saint. It was just a Tier 1 memory, so no amount of protection it could provide would be of any help in this damned place. He would also rather kill himself than go into a battle while wearing a cloak. There were easier and less painful ways to die. Plus, it was white. Didn't exactly go along with the dark grey fabric of the puppeteer's shard, not to mention being a hindrance to anything having to do with stealth. The stone saint absorbed another shadow fragment, at least. Receiving his share of the soul shards and entrusting them to Effie, who had more than enough space in her enchanted bag, Sunny glanced at Nephis. Changing Star was looking at the sun, calculating something in her head. After a few moments, she sighed and said, "We still have some time. Let's explore the nest before ascending the statue." Sunny grinned. As an amateur explorer, this was exactly what he wanted to hear. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The nest was formed by endless wires of the strange metal web, and resembled a vast sphere. It was built around one of the legs of the stone colossus, effectively blocking the path to the bridge. The entrance was situated high above the ground, and extremely wide. Looking at the diameter of that hole gave Sunny an understanding of just how big the spider matriarch had been. He shivered. The second lord of the castle had been a very powerful individual. Sunny didn't even want to imagine what the battle with the giant arachnid must have looked like. Inside, it was dark and damp. Drops of black water were falling from above, creating an ominous melody. Peering into the darkness, Sunny suddenly stumbled and froze for a moment. This, he didn't expect. Previous index next. User comments. Shadow Slave Chapter 2 of the Bright Castle. It almost looked as if it was torn apart from within. Inside the terrifying wound around the dead matriarch. Inside them, withered carcasses of nightmare creatures of all shapes and sizes were preserved in a strangely good condition. This was a true museum of terror. The nightmare creatures appeared as though they were kept alive inside the cocoons for a long time before finally succumbing to death and turning into mummified corpses. Perhaps the abominable spiders stored them there for later consumption. Or not. Noticing a few cocoons that had been broken open, and what was inside of them, Sunny had to try hard to stop himself from vomiting. The iron spiders did not use the monsters caught in the cocoons for food. They used them as incubators. The creatures in the broken cocoons had been devoured from within. A few of them still had hundreds of small, moist eggs embedded into their flesh, with embryonic spiderlings moving weakly behind the slightly transparent shells. Curse it all. Damn these spiders, damn the labyrinth, damn the forgotten shore, and especially damn the damned nightmare spell that had brought him here. Sunny suddenly felt tired of this long, feverish, never-ending nightmare he had found himself in. But the worst was still to come. Sword cut it open. With a short nod, the proud legacy summoned the enchanted Jinn and took a step forward. Approaching the cocoon, he stopped and hesitated for a few moments. Be careful. Glancing back at Changing Star, Caster lingered for a second, and then faced the cocoon with grim determination written on his face. As ghostly green light emanated from the blade of his sword, he swung it with the graceful precision of an expert swordsman. The tip of the Jinn cut through the metal wires of the cocoon, splitting it open. A shriveled human body fell to the floor, making the legacy jump back. Nephis, Caster, and Sunny stared at it, their faces pale and full of ghastly resentment. Then, Sunny bent over and emptied the contents of his stomach. This was just too much. The young man, whose corpse they found in this harrowing place, did not die an easy death. In fact, being eaten alive from the inside by 100 of tiny nightmare creatures was probably the worst fate imaginable. At least Sunny couldn't think of anything worse. But even worse still, he recognized the dead sleeper. His face was strangely intact, with an expression of horrifying agony frozen on it forever. Despite the overall condition of the corpse, Sunny knew who it was just from one look. It was the young man who had attended the academy with them, the one who had called him a shorty when Sunny first approached Castor, to create the impression that he was a boastful lunatic. Looking at their condition, Effie frowned. "Did you guys know him?" After a few moments of silence, Castor slowly nodded. "Yes. His name was Stephen. He was the youngest heir of the Pandavar clan." Stephen. Sunny had not even bothered to learn the name of this arrogant young man back when they were preparing to venture into the dream realm at the academy. In fact, he had really disliked him, and for a good reason. But looking at the hideous, terrifying corpse in front of him, he had forgotten all about it. Sunny would never wish this fate on anyone, let alone one of his fellow students. Slowly, a solemn mood overtook the cohort. They had already known that the other 3 sleepers sent to the Forgotten Shore this year never made it to the Dark City, which meant that they had perished somewhere in the labyrinth. However, finding one of them served as a stark reminder of how fragile their own lives were. Who knew what would happen to them in the future? If not today, death could be waiting for them tomorrow. Perhaps years from now, it would be their corpses that someone would stumble upon by accident. Some time later, Nephis gritted her teeth and turned away. Then, she said, her voice suppressed and hollow, "We need to leave. The sun is setting." Her words broke the silence and brought everyone back from their grim reveries. Castor lingered for a few minutes, then spoke in a hesitant tone. Aren't we going to bury him?" Changing Star shook her head. "There's not enough time. I also don't want anyone touching the bodies infected with these eggs. It's too dangerous." The members of the cohort looked at each other. No one had a reasonable objection, but it felt wrong to just leave their fellow human here. Finally, Nephis sighed. A complicated expression appeared on her face, and then she said, "All right. Go. I'll catch up with you guys later." Sunny stared at her for a few moments, and then slowly turned away. One after another, the 5 of them glanced at Changing Star and left, leaving her alone with the dead young man and numerous cocoons, each hiding a slain nightmare creatures. As soon as the last member of the cohort climbed out of the nest, a beam of pure radiance suddenly shot from the dark hole of its entrance, followed by a wave of scorching heat. The purifying fire unleashed by Changing Star engulfed the remains of their fellow students and then spread to the numerous cocoons, the nightmare creatures inside of them, and even the corpse of the spider matriarch herself. The insides of the nest turned into an incandescent, incinerating furnace. Everything inside of it was doomed to be annihilated and turned to ashes. A few minutes later, the whole structure was consumed by furious white flames. Nephis had escaped the burning nest shortly after the rest of her cohort, her face pale and tired. Leaving the grandiose funeral pyre behind, they began ascending the statue of the ancient warrior. The night was approaching. Previous index next. User Shadow Slave Chapter 225. On the Shoulders of Giants. Once they climbed all the way to the broad shoulders of the statue, and found a suitable place to make camp, everyone looked down without having to say anything. Far below them, the giant nest was still aflame. The cables that constituted it were melting and turning into rivers of liquid metal, flowing down from the edges into the vast abyss of the canyon. The turbulent black waters were rising from below to meet them. When the 2 streams met, one lightless, the other incandescent, billowing columns of hot vapor shot into the air. For a few moments, it seemed as though light and darkness were on equal footing. But then the cursed sea rose from the depths of the canyon in a surge, and washed away the brightness of melting iron away. The flood of blackness crashed into the burning nest, dousing it. A minute or so later, the white flames were gone. The surface of the dark sea continued to rise, as though nothing had ever happened. Sunny sighed and turned to Nephis. Now that they had reached their goal, it was time to face the real danger. With a grim expression on his face, he asked, "So, now what?" He knew the general concept of how she was planning to reach the southern edges of the forgotten shore in a short time, but not the details. Changing Star glanced at him, lingered for a moment, and then said, "We arrived at the canyon faster than I expected. There are still 2 days left before we can act. So, make yourself at home. We'll rest tomorrow, and start preparing for it the next day." Sunny smiled. Rest, that sounded swell. Plus, he wasn't really looking forward to making use of the fast and comparatively safe method of traveling through the labyrinth that Nephis had talked about. In fact, he would rather never have to use it at all. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Just like that, the cohort found itself with nothing to do for the next 2 days. Before leaving the Dark City, Changing Star had anticipated that various things could slow them down and padded the schedule of the expedition with extra time. Who knew that they would actually make it to the broken bridge so fast? In any case, Sunny wasn't complaining. He had a lot to do and think about. For example, the mysterious connection between his patchy, Effie spear, and the headless statues that stood around the forgotten shore. The statues represented the 7 valiant heroes that had made an oath to return light to this cursed land thousands of years ago. Sunny had seen 3 of them by now, the knight, the graceful woman, and now this mighty warrior. Did every statue have a connection with a specific memory? If so, what was that connection, and why was Nephis so reluctant to share this information with everyone? Well, it wasn't like he and Changing Star were very close now. Sunny had drawn a clear line to denote the nature of their relationship himself. He insisted that he was not a true member of the cohort, but merely a hired specialist. Why would she share the secret with him? This was a logical conclusion, but Sunny couldn't help but feel a bit resentful. Despite the fact that he was her first partner, now, the situation had changed. Nephis had other people to rely on, like Castor. So why would she say that Sunny was the only person she trusted on the Forgotten Shore except for Cassie, and then hide her technique from Castor? Everything felt so complicated. In any case, there was an invisible line drawn between the core members of the hunting party and the outsiders, Sunny and Kai. No one consciously avoided them, but it was clear that the line existed. When all was said and done, the 4 true members of the cohort preferred each other's company. That's why Sunny and Kai ended up spending a lot of time together, chatting about this and that and generally having a nice time. Honestly, Sunny couldn't complain. As far as companions went, the charming archer was not the worst option. Plus, their conversations were extremely entertaining. Kai had a lot of fun stories about his life as a celebrity, while Sunny had plenty of macabre anecdotes about his life in the outskirts. Their life experiences were so vastly different that it was almost as if they were from different worlds. As a result, both felt like they were listening to fictional stories about some strange and fantastical land that they had never heard about before. Sunny spent the rest of his time training with the sword, trying to turn shadow dance from an ethereal concept into a practical set of core principles. The progress was painfully slow, but now there was progress, at least. He was having so much trouble, because his chosen battle style was so strange and elusive. Unlike most styles, which started with certain movements and steps, this one was supposed to imitate any movement and any step instead of introducing its own. So it was more about the state of mind and the flexibility of his physical behavior. Sunny had to create a set of training exercises that would allow his body and muscle memory to become capable of adapting to any style and turn pliable like a shadow. On the first day of trying, his whole body ached. Despite his incredible physical shape and experience with tough training, Sunny ended up straining the muscles that he didn't even know he had, and forced those that he did know about to behave in a way that was utterly different from what they were used to. Actually, his previous training was even detrimental to the whole process. He had to make himself unlearn a lot of things to allow for this strange style to take root in his very bones. Thankfully, the foundation of his technique was changing stars flowing style, which itself was designed for maximum adaptability. If Sunny learned another style, or was further into mastering any existing technique, this would have been 10 times harder, if not impossible. Needless to say, his exercises were in no way similar to the beautiful and graceful dance he had seen in his dream. In fact, from the side, Sunny must have looked as though he was having a seizure. He caught more than one amused stare while practicing. It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that he was slowly pushing himself toward mastering the basics of shadow dance, and, hopefully, receiving his first relic. Previous index next. User comments. Write comment. Please read and apply the rules before posting a comment. By sharing your comment, you agree to all the Shadow Slave Chapter 226, The Fool. On the evening of the first of the 2 days that they had at their disposal, Sunny climbed all the way to the highest point of the statue, and sat there alone, looking at the setting sun. He felt as though he had to find a sense of balance that he had lost at some point along the way. Not because he missed it, but because he was going to need that balance to remain firm and steady when the moment of truth came. If he was right about the future, then this was probably the last day of peace he would experience until this whole thing was over. Not only the expedition, but all of it. Looking back, his behavior in these past few months was highly erratic. Where were the cold rationality and ruthlessness that saved him so many times in the past? The caution and devious cunning that allowed him to survive the first nightmare. He had not been acting like himself for a long time. Yes, his mental state had suffered greatly because of everything that had happened. But was it the only reason? Come to think of it, the first blow dealt to him was the bitter revelation that there was no gateway in the bright castle. After everything that Sunny had endured to make it to the dark city, the crushing intensity of their journey through the labyrinth, the diabolical trap of the soul devourer, and their escape from it, the cold and harrowing night of traversing the dark sea, all of it turned out to have been for nothing. Not only were they not rewarded for their efforts, but all of their hopes were mercilessly destroyed and obliterated instead. This alone was enough to drive a person mad. Then came the feeling of alienation he felt while living with Nephis, Cassie, and all the newcomers in the outer settlement. Instead of finding support and solace in the company of his friends, Sunny fell into his old habits. Unconsciously, he turned himself into an outcast to prevent anyone from making him one. This was the most noticeable, but not the only instance of him regressing to his old self. After fighting so hard to change and grow, Sunny ended up abandoning most of the lessons he had learned after becoming infected by the nightmare spell. He was almost like an addict relapsing after a few days of sobriety and giving up completely because of this one small mistake. But who could blame him? Sunny was already shaking under the pressure of the situation. One little push, and he would fall under its weight. In the end, it was not one, but 3 blows that shattered him completely. As though the world wanted to make sure that he was truly broken. First was the terrible epitome of what Cass's vision really meant. Almost instantly after that, while Sunny was still reeling, came the fatal mistake in the conversation with Harper and the brutal murder that followed. And if that was not enough, the person he relied on the most to keep his sanity in this cursed place, Nephis, made it impossible for him to trust her any longer. Anyone would have collapsed under that weight. And yet Sunny managed to keep his balance, even if just barely. The final straw that finally broke him was the excruciating, never-ending sea of torturous pain he suffered after being mortally wounded by the Black Knight. After that, Sunny had relinquished all pretense of having control. And now here he was, playing the fool, acting like a fool, and fooling around with Kai and Effie. Wasn't it fun? Wasn't it easy? Yes, his mental state wasn't great. But it was also very convenient to blame everything on this condition. The truth of it was that Sunny did not try to rein himself in at all. In fact, he welcomed this madness. Being a bit crazy was comforting, simple, and safe. It protected him from having to look at the heartbreaking truth and remember it. Sunny needed the shield of madness to save himself from the bottomless despair that threatened to destroy him completely. So what if he was prone to act recklessly in this state? So what if he made mistakes here and there and took unnecessary risks? Anything was better than having to face that despair. Just like Nephis had said, one had to become a little insane to survive in the world that had gone mad. And yet, Sunny knew that what he was doing was nothing but hiding his head in the sand. And now that the end was approaching, he had to stop hiding from the truth. He had to admit and endure it. This was the only way for him to survive. As the sun disappeared behind the horizon and the absolute darkness drowned the forgotten shore, he sighed deeply and whispered, "All right. All right. It's time to wake up." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next day, 6 humans were standing at the edge of the vast canyon as the twilight of dusk drowned the world in shadows. Far below them, the black waters of the cursed sea were raging, rising from the depths in a terrifying, obliterating wave. In a few minutes, all light was going to be completely gone. And then, the flood of darkness would wash over the world, destroying anyone left standing in its path. And yet, the humans were not rushing to get away. Instead, they just stood there and waited. Looking down into the canyon, Sunny gritted his teeth and shivered. Then, he glanced at Nephis and licked his dry lips. "Are you sure about this?" Changing Star did not spare him a look and simply nodded. Despite the fact that the rising black water was quickly approaching them, her face was calm and composed. A moment later, the last vestiges of sunlight disappeared, leaving them in utter darkness. The silence that surrounded them was broken only by the sound of waves rushing against the walls of the canyon, as if calling the monsters of the depths to come take her. Previous index next. Pop. Shadow Slave Chapter 227. Comparatively safe. The embrace of impenetrable darkness was broken by the furious, white light of changing stars' incandescent sword. Illuminated by it, 6 people were standing on the shore of a raging river. Their faces were pale and grim. The canyon had disappeared, consumed by the rising surge of the black water. Now, the cursed sea was flowing over its edges, ready to swell and flood the narrow passages of the great labyrinth in an unstoppable wave. Sunny felt cold water wash over his feet and shivered. The rest of the cohort reacted exactly the same. Even Kai, who could escape into the lightless skies at any moment, seemed to be deeply unnerved by the closeness of the encroaching sea. Among the 6 of them, only 3 had truly experienced the perils of this dark abyss. They knew that the real dread came not from the sea itself, but from the terrors that hid in its cursed depths. Like the host of the whispering voices that they had heard beneath the branches of the soul tree, or the gargantuan creature that had almost cost Nephis her life. However, Sunny was not going to make a remark to educate the rest of the cohort. After all, what they were trying to do right now was to summon one of these terrors from below. One that was different from all the others. Sunny, peering into the darkness, he lingered. I don't see anything, yet. The water was already to his shins and rising swiftly. Sunny grimaced and struggled with the desire to turn around and run away without looking back. If he was fast enough, if he was lucky enough, he could still make it to the giant statue before the torrent of darkness drowned him under its crushing weight. Instead, Sunny glanced at Nephis and Cassie. The blind girl had glimpsed the secret of the forgotten shore in her visions and shared it with Changing Star. Changing Star had devised a plan to make use of it. Both of them were confident that they were going to succeed. So, he was going to be confident, too. Sunny didn't fully trust either of his former companions, not anymore. But he trusted their judgment. Just as that thought appeared in his mind, there was a subtle movement at the edges of his vision. Turning his head, Sunny stared into the darkness and trembled. It's here. Out there in the distance, a massive shape was moving through the waves, attracted by the light of Changing Star's incandescent blade. The sea seethed and swirled around it, the black mass of water easily pushed away by the approaching creature. Nephis gritted her teeth and somehow made her flames burn even brighter, forcing the darkness to retreat another dozen steps. Get ready. A few moments later, the furious sounds of a massive body moving through the dark water reached their ears. The creature was a true giant, easily towering above the waves even though it was walking on the bottom of the canyon. Well, no surprise. Full of terror and awe, Sunny watched as the thing they were waiting for came closer. Soon, he could discern the general shape of it. 2 hills